All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we have Rich Palmer. And as co-founder and CTO of Gravyty, an artificial intelligence company focused solely on social good, interesting twist, Rich is driven by applying technologies in ways that improve our world for the better. Under Rich's leadership, Gravyty has created a suite of AI tools for fundraiser enablement. These tools have been proven to help organizations raise more revenue for their causes without hiring more staff. They can also predict potential donors and change the behavior of frontline fundraisers to increase efficiency. Prior to Gravyty, Rich was senior product manager and software engineer at RelSci, which is a $120 million business connection intelligence platform, and the head of portfolio analytics for S&P's Capital IQ's quantitative solutions team. Very familiar with that from my time in investment banking. Rich is also a natural entrepreneur and has founded 4 tech companies. He was the recipient of the 2015-2016 Entrepreneurship Award from Babson College. Rich holds a BS in economics and in information technology from Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute and an MBA from Babson. He lives in Greater Boston area with his wife, Brittany, and his dog, Atlas. Thanks for joining us today, Rich.
Darius, I'm so happy to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about your profile is not only have you been involved on the entrepreneur side, but you also invest in AI companies at the C level. Am I correct on that?
That's right.
All right, awesome. So you get kind of to see both ends, and you can think a little bit more deeply about AI when you're looking at these other companies, and probably give them some advice as they look to scale. One of the other interesting things is at the turn of the year, you all raised, what was it, 21 million from K1?
Yep. So nice private equity firm focused. Really, they were putting together a nice thesis around the nonprofit space, the higher ed space, all of these kinds of things, and they were forward thinking to put these companies together and give them is it LA based?
Yeah,
it was funny on the investor side. You know, a lot of investors, they see AI and they're like, oh, shiny object, and they hear nonprofits and they say, ugh, I've burned too many times. These guys didn't blink and then knew just as much as I did about the space. So it was pretty awesome, natural collaboration, more than an investment kind of thing. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, no, awesome. Yeah, I know that I'm very familiar with them. I was with them a few years back, and they are definitely an exciting company in terms of how they think about. And so once I saw that you're your investor, I knew you guys were kind of in a good position from a growth perspective and an efficiency perspective.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I want to hop in and understand, more about the product, more about the business. And if we could frame the conversation through thinking about what was the friction point that you saw in your particular market, and how did you approach creating a solution for that particular base of customers?
Yeah, so it's, first off, again, thank you for this opportunity. It's awesome to share this story and everything we'll be talking about over the next couple of minutes. I always like to frame this in terms of third person versus first person problems, right? So a third person problem is something, you see and you'd be like, oh, that'd be great if that existed. Or you hear, especially as an investor, an idea that comes to me and I say, I wouldn't use that, but I can imagine someone else would. So already it's a third person problem. As a technologist, I'm sort of a generalist, right? Like technology can be used to solve like any problem, So I'm always looking for that person that's actually lived some pain, so that if we can team up together, we potentially can solve that pain. And so that's a lot of what happened was I ended up at Babson through a variety of different channels. Also at Babson was what became my co-founder, a guy named Adam Martell, who was a frontline fundraiser there. Admittedly, I know I'm being recorded. He would say this himself, non-technical guy, but really, really connected to both the art of fundraising, the ways of managing relationships when nonprofits don't really have like a product. They're really selling trust and attention and all that kind of stuff. So it's even harder to sell than selling for-profit things, right? And what ended up happening was we became friends first. We were at similar events. We were talking a lot. We had overlapping networks. And who knows about fundraising at nonprofits until you ask somebody. You know,
Right.
we're used to the give me $1, you know, from my school or something. This is that plus all the other ways that resources come into these organizations. So I started asking about it, and he was like, well, yeah, this is my job, and I get spreadsheets of data, and then it's kind of up to me to figure out what I do next. It's like,
yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Data.
And how is that going? Yeah, what's a data? I hear you said data, right? And there were situations where he would be just sort of him, and you know, he's a great guy and actually just kicked butt at fundraising there. Most of his other colleagues were struggling with the data concept of this and like what to do with that. So,
right.
You know, they were sorting based off of the person who actually gave the last biggest gift. Which in my statistical mind, I was like, well, that doesn't necessarily correlate to the next biggest gift. They seem decoupled. Like there's so many ways that you can decide to give. So we started looking at this. We built a couple of the algorithms while we were just talking to, you know, friends at hospitals, friends at nonprofits. And all of a sudden it showed up that this was a problem everywhere. And every nonprofit had this problem. Yeah.
And when you say problem, are you referring to, look, we need to identify our donor base and how we should communicate with them?
It's more nuanced than that. So it's interesting. Okay. It's a separation from marketing,
okay,
more towards a one-to-one. So of all of those people, so think about a school, for example, that's alumni, event attendees, like things like that. So people you already know. So not of the 7 billion people who I can bring in, of this already kind of overwhelming pool of folks that are either have given or have shown that they want to connect with the organization. I can spend time with one of them at a time. Who is that person is really, really, really hard to do without, you know, skipping a couple of steps or just sort of rolling the dice or whatever.
Right.
And from that point, you know, if it's me, Rich, or if it's you, and I choose, okay, so I'm the fundraiser. We've picked Darius. What do I say to you? You know, if you're a board member who's been engaged for forever, that's way different than if we're just starting off. It's way different than if I'm 5 conversations in. And this combination of sort of machine learning with NLP, so natural language processing and natural language generation, combines there. And we give, in the most layman version of the term, we self-write emails for fundraisers. So we hand them a draft. Right. They can edit it and send it off. And as they edit it, we get to learn sort of how they like to talk. Maybe they had some unstructured data in their head that makes it in there that we restructure. So many things sort of stem from that. Yeah.
So are you enabling, you know, based on previous emails that an individual has sent, right? Are you enabling them to well, basically you're creating the opportunity for them to have pre-written emails based on how they speak or the things that they have historically said.
Yep. And so it's either based off of how they historically spoke, if you're buying our software and you've been employed at that organization, or oftentimes fundraising is a tough job and there's a lot of ebb and flow and attrition and all that kind of stuff. So odds are at any given organization, half my users are kind of new there, either there or new to fundraising. So we also give them sometimes suggested starting points that they can build off of. And the sort of, it's not even like a discrete single point in time communication, but how do you naturally manage that in a way that, you know, the average gift of significance takes about 12 to 18 months to close. 10 to 12 interactions.
Right.
Wow. Keeping that all in your head and knowing that there's attrition is really difficult. So we help handle all of that too.
Right. Okay. So the intelligence behind this is really, I mean, before I ask this question, who is the user within a nonprofit? Who is the person who's actually using the software?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it should be a quicker one to answer, but I'll explain why it'll take me a second to explain it, right? So there's definitely people on staff that fundraise, just like a for-profit sales team has, you know, let's say enterprise sales and SMB sales, and then your BDRs, right? There's equivalent sort of structures, like organizational structures that nonprofits, you know, of mid-major enterprise kind of size. That's who we deal with. The little nonprofits don't usually have this problem. They actually need to source folks in. which is not a problem we solve, right? The crazy thing for us is, fundraisers obviously flock to our tool. They really enjoy it. It helps them get through like these teams of fundraisers. We always say we're more of a workforce expansion play too. So we have a team of 5 that's going to all of a sudden, same amount of time of the day, do the work of like a team of 50. And it's just wild, right? But as we got further in and got a little more nuanced and we saw a couple of different avenues, we had one situation which was really interesting. The fundraising staff turned over too much and they couldn't hire. So they actually gave these tools to the executive assistant. So this person who had no fundraising experience was all of a sudden able to, and was a cost center for the business, if you want to use such defined terms, started making money for them, started engaging with folks, which is awesome on one side. And on the other side, we also enable like imagine if you run like a sports, what do you call it? Like the athletic director or a coach or a professor that sort of connect to the students and stuff. They don't know how to fundraise, So we also can help them manage this by sort of offloading the knowledge and expertise onto AI and then free them up. It's always my goal is to free them up to do this, to have a one-on-one lovely conversation.
Yeah, no, my school, it seems like they're doing a fundraiser for every semester, but no, it was interesting when I received a message from my college coach, and I guess the thought process was, hey, let's have the folks who have close relationships with these folks actually send out the messages, right? So my college basketball coach has no experience behind fundraising. At least I don't know of any. But, it sounds like he could actually be using your software to say, all right, what should I say in this email, right? And how should I, and then who are the folks that I should be reaching out to as well? And is it timing a factor too in terms of when I should reach out?
Yeah, of course, the sequences of action and the appropriate sort of, if something's not working in one sense, like I'm trying this language, I've tried it a couple of times, it's just not working. Even pivoting strategy, which has a timing component, is something you can do if you one of our tools is like more of a deeper email integration. So we get to see all of those things, response rates, like what people are saying, all of that kind of stuff, a little closer to scary sensitive data, but we are well equipped to handle that, which is kind of a cool position to be in.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's very interesting. Very interesting. So then you kind of got 2 different folks, one who is going to be on a management level, but inexperienced in terms of raising funds, right? Another person who's going to be, look, part of my job is outreach, right? My daily job is outreach, and I can use this tool to accelerate that as well. I thought it was very interesting, when you talk about the founder story, you've got someone who is a subject matter expert, right, in fundraising, and then you yourself bring the actual technical chops. You hear the word data, you automatically, you know what, maybe we might be able to come up with a solution for this. I would love to learn more about that thought process where you say, all right, yes, maybe we could put some static code together to be able to create a similar product, right? But actually artificial intelligence can do this. I would love to hear, kind of that thought process behind the product development.
Yeah, and it was interesting. So there's sort of 2 sides to that, or two milestones to that. One was, doing portfolio analytics. I was doing a lot of attribution analysis and things like that. So it's basically you're a portfolio manager and you're judged based off of the index that you're judged off of. And the index has buckets, these sectors, and then within each sector is all the stocks, right? And so very, very, very similar to demographic buckets of, people that are, hitting a 25-year anniversary, your young alumni, your grateful patients at a hospital. So there's these buckets that you have to decide whether you jump into or not. And then within there's these individual touch points of, do I buy or sell the stock? So also do I reach or not reach out to this person? And what happens if I'm wrong? How do I get out? How do I do this? And all of those have a timing sort of component to it as well. Okay. And you're smiling, right? Because you can imagine, as I'm talking to my non-technical co-founder, he's like, oh my God, like, yeah, that's what you did? I was like, yeah, man, like, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And so we started just really feeling that out. And that kicked off that component of who to talk to. The component of what to say actually came a little bit later, because we thought, and from a company building standpoint, it's always interesting to hear this avenue, if you don't mind. Like, we started with a platform, like everybody, right? With a login. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
Everybody saw the demo. They loved it. Some people paid us in those early days. Some people are on trial. 9 out of 10 times when they got it in their hands, they didn't log in. Because, like, think about it. Like, we've got our email, we've got our, calendar, we've got, in the nonprofit space, you're hanging out in your CRM, your database of record, and maybe you're in Facebook. And that's kind of like the end of my attention span as like a human being. So asking me to remember one more password, add one more thing, change one more bit of my workflow, it was like, we're just like banging our heads. We're like, everybody loves what we're doing. Nobody's using what we're doing. And everyone agrees they should be. So through time, we were like, okay, then let's just hang out in one of those places they're already at. So it's email, calendar, CRM, Facebook. Let's just pick on them, right? You're obviously not going to hang out on Facebook, right? CRMs are these big companies that are already doing their own things. And so jumping into that area was the barriers to entry as a young company were just insurmountable. Calendars are boring, my words, my opinion. And so we were like, okay, what about email? And from that standpoint, we actually ended up for a little while getting rid of our platform entirely as a web platform, and lived entirely in people's emails. And
this is as a plugin, like you create a plugin.
See, that's the crazy thing. So we've got this upstream data from the CRMs, from external data sources, all that kind of stuff. All the smarts still exist. The delivery mechanism is just the next email in your inbox, which prompts you to do something. So either, maybe log into the platform if it's something kind of complicated you have to do, or we actually, right within an email, we have a button, no plugin, which is crazy.
Interesting.
That lets you actually open up a draft of the email right there and send it. And we track it through BCC. So it's pretty seamless. I play with my clients sometimes and I'm just like, they're like, well, how much of a lift is this? What's the change management look like? And I'm like, all right, valid point. Now, have you ever sent an email? And they're like, well, don't be a jerk. I was like, no. Have you ever sent an email? They're like, yeah, of course. And they're like, that's it. That's all this is. It's just sending one more email for us. And one, last point is giving in that situation where people are already like, what the hell? Like, what is that? We give users like awesome control over their path too. So once you send that one email, so I'm going to send an email to Darius. If I'm done for the day, it's like Uber, right? If I'm done for the day, I just turn my app off and I don't look at it.
Got it.
If I'm not done for the day, that next email is already teed up. And so it's this rapid fire kind of concept that just, it lets you control it. Like a sense of control when you're giving up other things to AI is really important.
No, that's actually really interesting. And a key point that you touched on there is the importance of the user experience. You've got this, hey, you can start with our login portal, but again, another password, another step that I have to do, and then follow up with a step. Versus I can actually just be within my email and I have a relevant pop-up, right? That's actually valuable, that is going to help me to do my job better. And, the interesting thing is, and you said it without saying, but you could have the best technology, you could have the best algorithms, but if the UI, the UX isn't working for the customer, no one's going to use it, right?
Yeah. It's funny. It's like I obviously have sophisticated AI, or else we wouldn't have gotten to this place. But that's like 50% of my job. The other 50 is behavioral psychology. So either through UI, through UX, or the mechanism from which I'm talking users through this new wave of things, knowing for sure the people on the other end are wondering whether I'm going to take their job or not. Like all of these things are just coming out of the CTO's mouth. Like when in history does that kind of stuff happen? And it's now. It's when we're facing these like incredibly existential things, because AI is just kind of doing well, and it's continuing to progress.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I think is important to bring up here is, So if I'm thinking from the perspective of your co-founder, right? I'm a subject matter expert. I'm amazing at fundraising. I know nothing. I'm just assuming here. I know nothing about artificial intelligence. My first thought is, yeah, it sounds like it's the new wave, but I wouldn't even know where to start to build a company like that. So I think it's, it's interesting that you can you can almost borrow that experience, in the way that you all teamed up, right? And I'm going to take my subject matter expertise and marry it with your expertise in data, in analytics, in AI, or machine learning, right? And now we can create something. So I guess what I'm getting to is, as you build these algorithms, right? One of the things that's important is right, what data points are important here, right? How do we think about feature engineering, right? And so it's almost as if you two were able to work together, where, look, you understand the data and how it needs to come together, but he may understand, all right, here are the specific points that we need to key in on, because this may indicate that this donor is someone that we should reach out to. Right. So, but I would love to hear about how you guys came together and figured out the data that you need that would drive the productivity of the AI that you built.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It comes back to sort of co-founder dynamics, right? The concept of, like, we had I often talk about it as sort of yin yang, right? So together we're great if we become great. And the greatness happens through communication, right? And so from my standpoint, I needed to put code, ones and zeros, into a computer that mimicked what he already knew. So I knew how to do the code, he knew how to do this. And that was a sort of, I needed way more input than he did in that moment, right? So how do I map the real world in code? Was those early days was a lot of, there's weird terms, sci-bunts, lie-bunts. Lie-bunt means you gave a gift last year, but unfortunately not this year. And all the weird vernacular from every industry. It exists in every industry. I know those terms now because my user was sitting right next to me every day while we were building this thing. And it was awesome to be able, the only better way would be if I actually had my own problem to solve and my user's in my head, but I wouldn't have, but then I'd also just be by myself going crazy in my head. Right. So there's a lot of benefit to having co-founders together. There's a lot of benefit. There's a loss of benefit if you have too many. Obviously, there's a lot of literature on that. But and then part of it was, Darius, you judge me if I'm relatable enough now. This is all practice as the CTO. Adam is naturally gifted. He's got the ability to handle a cocktail party like nobody's business, stand up on stage and really do that. But inevitably, especially when we're raising money, the question of, what about your tech stack? What about how the AI works? How'd you handle bias? How'd you do these kinds of things? And those have to be his words, not mine, right? So a lot of the initial sort of flow of information was to me, and then it went backwards, and now we're sort of on a nice little Pareto kind of thing. So 80% of each other kind of overlaps in what we talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just think that's so interesting because you're essentially a prime example, or even on the co-founder side, right? You're a prime example of someone a group who is, look, I don't have to be AI literate from day one, right? I just need to understand the problem or understand the industry in depth. And then I can find someone else to team up with who is literate in artificial intelligence, and now we can team up and decide whether there's something to be built, where there's a problem that can be solved by AI. So
and sometimes I talk about it, if I might, as a childlike sense of wonder, right? So even though he knows everything there's to know about fundraising, and even though I'm being extreme here, even though I know everything about AI, there is to know,
right? That's even possible, right?
Neither of those are true, right? But not knowing ahead of time that those aren't true, I could be like, well, why does it work that way? Well, is there a better way? Right. And if I say, actually, no, dude, that's not possible with code, he'd be like, well, why? And then 5 whys later, I'd be like, oh my God, I can do it. I'll be right back, Like,
and so him almost being naive it pushes you further.
In both directions, which I would not have. I appreciate it now. Those are stressful conversations to have somebody who you you're like, I know what I know, right? But they're still asking you and pressing you, which is, I wouldn't trade that for the world. It was an awesome sort of gauntlet to go through.
Yeah, and it's very interesting as you kind of, some of the clients that, we'll work with on the Tesoro AI side, right? You'll get started. Maybe you'll even have a technical founder that gets started, but didn't bring on someone who understands, who has that subject matter expertise, right? And so then their challenge is, all right, well, how do I think about my go-to-market strategy? Right. And so, it's important to kind of have, in some shape, form, or fashion, however it is, to have both of those pieces come together.
100%.
I'd like to kind of go back to the early days when you guys were first taking off, right? You mentioned some folks were on a trial, some folks were paid, but what was it like getting those first few customers?
Man, it was the hustle. It was the, who do you know? And once we get in there and show them in the demo, 3 more people, because we were really sort of, we weren't sure, there's 1.5 million nonprofits in the US, right. 10 million globally. That's a big market, right? In terms of numbers, it's a monster amount of money is being moved around that sector. So investors shy away for a whole bunch of other reasons, but from what we saw, we're like, this is cool. This seems like a good opportunity. Now, we ended up in one basement of a nonprofit talking to the person who is our buyer, where her computer died in the moment because it's so old, it's not going to work. And we're like, oh, wow, you are probably not our user. Whoops. Okay. So, but as it stands, it's funny, even the yin yang thing, I'm sitting there fixing the computer while Adam's trying to talk and distract this person so we don't get blamed, because we didn't do it. It just broke and stuff like that. And so we learned slowly through that time that there were specific users, specific buyers, and all of these kinds of things that came about through our connections. Like two pieces of advice. Our first round of funding was entirely angel driven, which was important. We had dozens of angels. We said, we don't really care about the check size for y'all. We obviously had a round on the hit, but every of those people in the board of a nonprofit or is wealthy enough to give a meaningful donation to somebody, right? Which from us, from a go-to-market standpoint, just opened so many doors, because our interests were like wildly aligned, right? They want to make money, we want to make money, we want to help people, they want to help people. It's perfect, right? And then the other thing that we did was put right in those early days, we're nobody, we're 2 people. We've got the expertise on paper, but we don't have the credibility to put a company together around it. So we actually put together a customer exploratory advisory board, which looks a lot like the company boards, customer boards that the companies do later on. But we got as many people together as possible to help us guide this ship, right? Nonprofit leaders, investors, company builders, big donors, everybody in one little room, or we had newsletters and stuff, and that helped. It helped in 2 ways. One, it helped gut check us that we were on the right path or off the right path. And 2, we put every one of their faces on every one of our pitch decks, so it made it look like we were way bigger than we were. So it's I would highly recommend every company that ever gets started does that if they follow our path.
There you go. Very, very interesting. And so eventually you were able to kind of figure out where your market is, right? There, these folks, let's say they're kind of on the small organization level where they don't really have a need. On the large, let's call it enterprise. I don't know what you'd call it in the nonprofit world, but they're just well beyond the market that we want to serve today. Eventually landed in kind of that mid-size nonprofit. Very interesting. And so, you started off with 2 guys, right? You as the technical lead, your partner as the subject matter expert. I'm curious about how you thought about building out, right, your additional resources to help you build the tech, right? So specifically from a data science and machine learning perspective.
Yep. So I had all the nice thing about the company we were building is we together had all the skills already. And even if they were sort of nascent, I just got my MBA, so I read about it in a book, like marketing or something, right? So like we had the skills, and it was really just how do you expand out from us and specialize and have somewhat of a deep bench in certain areas, right? the advice the first person we brought on was actually a good friend of mine who's one of the smartest engineers I've ever met, because I was running out of hours in the day to code. Right. I was like, dude, I need backup. And he said, yep, I'll join you once you raise some money. And I was like, come on, It's funny. We are great friends. He's still at the company. He's our VP of engineering. And so I'm grateful we took that first step. The next step we went on was more on the sales side.
Okay.
And I would have done it differently, slightly, just the order of operations. We realized maybe we had someone come in on the sales side, and most of what we were asking that person to do was actually maintain existing relationships, not build new relationships, right? Mm-hmm. Adam and I were fully capable of energizing this like base of, early adopters, but we kept doing that. And no one was there to really help the clients like be successful or ask them questions in those early days.
Got it.
So if I could have reordered it, I would have done, engineer first, customer success manager second, and then we can do some sales stuff, So that customer success focus, especially Jairus, on your point about the user, and my words of behavioral psychology, you use words of the user experience and the journey and stuff. Man, if there's not somebody there 24/7 helping that, you're wasting time. I wasted time early in those days, Yeah.
Very interesting, because that person is there to think through, all right, what are the pain points the customer's having with the product itself, right? And how do we get there to solve it ASAP?
And to your actual question about like the AI, ML, and data science and stuff like that, in the early days, I took who I could get. Right? Like we didn't have the kind of funding that could, dislodge somebody or get like a high profile person. So we actually relied on a lot of interns in those early days, like folks that were going through like Carnegie Mellon's ML program, who I had known I went to RPI, so fancy engineering school. So we had some interns from there, which was awesome because, again, childlike sense of wonder. They were just helping me in the moment, doing something no one knew if it was going to work. And since then, we've put together a really hefty kind of world-class data science team.
When you get 21 million, it makes it a lot easier, huh?
It makes it a lot easier. But yes and no, right? So all the fancy folks are already well compensated and doing this stuff at the big tech firms. And so what I saw was there were two areas that were very interesting to me. One, NLP I thought it was going to be an interest to, and a machine learning engineer would naturally have an interest in NLP. That wasn't necessarily the case as I was going out to market. So I started looking at just NLP folks, people who have a specific degree, just computational linguistics, right? And there are specific schools like no one's ever heard about, or they're off the radar, where that's what they're focused on. So I was getting people out of schools there.
Okay.
And then there's this one boot camp called the Data Incubator, which I very much respect. Where for you, if you don't know, for your listeners, they take like PhD folks and fancy master's folks who just don't want to go down that academic or big company path, repurpose their knowledge in a sort of data science boot camp, and then get them to companies. And that's where one of my best data engineers, he's now at CVS Health, I think. So he actually went back to the big company route.
Okay.
But it was an easy way, if you don't have the network of people, to find folks who for sure, if they graduate that program, it has actually a pretty low acceptance rate and a pretty low graduation rate. So if they made it through, they're worth it.
Right. So kind of finding organizations that they themselves develop some level of talent. Very, very interesting. And I think, the point is worth noting, right? You got the big firms are generally willing to write a check much larger than anyone as a startup than you typically feel comfortable writing, right? Especially if they find out that, someone is extremely talented. But, I think, and from the perspective of what's available, what's possible now that you have more of a remote work type of environment now, it opens up the possibility to find some of those diamonds in the rough, in the similar to the way you did in finding some of those schools that focused on NLP. I mean, now if you're saying, hey, listen, talent, we need them to be on the same time zone, but where they are, in the world is less important. I just need the quality and I need them to be in a place where we can communicate similar to the way we did in the office. And so now you can find more diamonds in the rough, but semi-globally, right?
And we're lucky, right? So doing this for social good, right? Knowing that at the end of the day, you're helping fund wings of hospitals, you're eradicating poverty, you're dealing with abuse, you're helping education happen, right? There's something something intangible that I'm able to offer that Google can't, and so we were actually competing with these monster companies sometimes for the same candidates, and we won. And I was like, what is going on? I'm paying you way less than those guys. Like, the hours are way longer, but the opportunity to use those skills for good, whether that's what you want to do forever, whether you're just curious about it, was such a, oh my God, I didn't even know how to put into words how important that was to our business.
And it allows you to retain folks longer. In addition, that they are excited about the problem that you are solving.
Yep.
Awesome.
That's been a privilege. And it's also, in the age of COVID, the nonprofit sector is being just wrecked, right? So they like 20% layoffs, like these big schools are canceling their football programs. Like they are struggling, right? And so knowing that every line of code my engineers are working on, every sales pitch my people are going on, every customer success person is working on their strategy with, is helping fix that problem. Oh my God. I wish I didn't have to sleep. I'd work all the time on this. There's no better calling for me personally.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I know we're coming up on time here, but I have one more question for you. Now, if you could go back to day one, knowing everything that you know now, what would you key on in the first 90 days?
That I would change, or that I would, that I liked the most?
Maybe one of both.
Oh my gosh.
I could give you an additional challenge there.
Interesting. So, and I already said one with the customer success thing.
Okay.
Interesting.
We'll let you slip with that one, but we need one more.
One thing which is especially important is we had obviously the data science side of things, but also the customer delivery mechanism, this UI, this UX. And so I chose to go down the path of using Django as our framework, which is Python based, right? Mostly because in the early days of the architecture, and this is important, this might sound technical, but it's important to non-technical people too. Your early day architecture, you don't want to redo it. Like, you don't want to choose a different programming language halfway through, right? If you don't have to. So making sure you have those early, what the trade-offs, there's trade-offs to all of those things. And I was deciding between a couple of different frameworks. We went down that path because Python was the language of data scientists, right? And so I would not change that for the world, even though there's some, Django, for all of its awesomeness, it's not holding up to some more fancy modern frameworks compared to what it was, but I wouldn't change that for the world. So that's one. I mean, the other thing I would also say that is non-technical that we got sort of wrong in the beginning was some of those original trial clients I was talking about, we charged them. Because we had some advisors that were saying, you have to make money early. You have to prove that you can make money. What that did was we charged a bunch of people, and it put weird pressure on us that reduced the amount of learning we got from them. And so all day, every day, if I could go back, I would say, we'll make money eventually, but I want to learn from these people right now. I want to see if they like our product. I want the freedom for them to yell at me and like all that stuff, right? Which we didn't have in the earliest 90 days. And about 90 days later, we're like, F this, like, this is a bad strategy. We pivoted away from that process. So I think that's what I would say. Hire CS early, make smart architectural decisions, and don't let people say money is the only reason you should exist as a company.
Awesome. Those are definitely some keys to success there. All right. Thanks, Rich. That's all we have on time, everyone. But this has been a very helpful and informative conversation. Rich, thank you for joining us, providing us insight on Gravyty, and also providing us some information on some tips that we should think about as we implement AI into our organizations.
Awesome. My pleasure, Darius. And I hope anybody who's interested in nonprofit space or AI, just look us up, look me up, and I'm happy to start a conversation. So
I'm glad you wore the shirt. What's the email address? What's not the email address? A web address.
So it's gravyty.com with a Y at the end. And this is, I actually don't have a shirt that says Gravyty. This says, I helped enable fundraising, and all I got was this Gravyty. It is the worst pun ever, but this is the best I got. But right. Gravyty, and just reach out. Happy to talk.
There we go. All right. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Darius.